I'm very, very pleased to welcome Gillian, Gillett, and Hunter Owens, who I know very well, from Caltrans. Gillian manages the California Integrated Mobility Program. And before Caltrans, she was the Transportation Policy Director for San Francisco, where we first met. Comes from the private sector, very focused on business process and financial applications. Then Hunter is the Research Data Management Manager for the California Integrated Mobility Program, which is a really long name.
I know, sorry.
Yeah.
It's going to get shorter,
Too many
hopefully.
syllables in that. Before that, he worked at the City of Los Angeles, Impact Labs, and the Center for Data Science and Public Policy. Data science is his game, and I have heard that you can distract him with tacos. So just so you know, and we didn't serve your taco need today, and I apologize for that.
Next time.
Yeah. Okay. I think of Gillian and Hunter as the entrepreneurs hidden inside of Caltrans, this giant organization building a new way of thinking about things, challenged by the same things that you get challenged by with startups. Not enough money, trying to get talent from big tech, and nobody really understanding what you're doing yet. Except us. We all appreciate what you're doing. And on that note, I think we're really lucky to have them inside of Caltrans, trying to kind of forge a new way of doing things. So, and there are 3 other wonderful data science Caltrans employees in the audience. Make sure that you, I'm terrible with names. So I know Natalie.
Julia and Amanda.
And Amanda, that's
Natalie.
it.
There
Thank
you
you. Anyway, look forward to your talk today, and thank you all again for coming today.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Jane. This is a great opportunity. Thanks, you guys, for letting us come and bend your ears about some of what we're doing. So I'm going to try to go fast because I'm sort of the John the Baptist to Hunter's Jesus, which is funny because we're both Jewish, so whatever. But the show is really Hunter. But in order to get Hunter what he needs, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I run the program, try to do all those things, and create a home where we can do a lot of stuff around mobility. So broadly speaking, I was recruited to remove the barriers between different modes of transit, or between different modes of transportation, and then within modes of transportation. So reduce friction wherever I can, starting with transit, trip planning, and payments, because that's where things are the worst at the moment. So we are, the California Integrated Travel Project is part of the program, and it's a grant-funded project that is a consortium of CalSTA, which is Caltrans' parent agency, Caltrans, and CCJPA, which is a railroad. And so that's the way that we really are a startup. We got grant money and one position at Caltrans to kind of get something, seed money going for a project, which is, we think, successful, and that is growing into a program. So we're hoping that the state will invest in in the California Integrated Mobility Program. You're right, with our own budget paid for by Caltrans. So we will find that out on that very soon. So we have 3 main things that are very private sector-y. 2 of them are private sector, the other one is very government-y. So rider experience, improving the customer experience, doing so sustainably with a focus on equity. So we do these 3 main things after a whole bunch of research that we did in 2019 and 2020, looking both at transit and then speaking to the private sector. So the most transit part of it is, what is the product? What are you buying when you buy transit? And how much does it cost? Were previously really impossible to answer in transit, and they're still difficult, but we've made great headways with GTFS, which you'll hear about a lot, which is sort of the only standard that we have in transit thus far. The second pillar that we stand on is really another data stream, but it's my bag, which is enabling contactless payments, so that you should be able to pay directly by bank cards instead of this whole mishigas with tickets and transfers and all that sort of stuff that makes transit way too confusing. You should be able to buy transit just like you buy coffee. And if people don't have debit cards, then maybe the state of California could do something about that instead of having transit agencies issue cards. So, and then the third thing that we do is working on automating discounts, because government benefits programs are many and varied in type, and it's really difficult for the government to put out money. And when you are entitled to a benefit of some kind from the state or the federal government, if it's administered locally, each local jurisdiction gets to make up the rules for how you verify your eligibility for something. And it's dehumanizing and an enormous waste of time. And surely we can do better, because the internet has been here for quite some time now. So as a business process person, I really like standards, and I also really like interoperability rather than integration. So we look to build the great big transit Lego set in the sky, so that all of the 797 transit agencies in California can build their Lego set as needed, rather than having to buy custom solutions that are always proprietary. So our first thing is the most transity thing, which is, what is the product? The customer needs to have accurate information about what the product is, where it is, how much it costs. And that's actually also good for the transit agency, because they can dog food that data to provide a better service. So we have a whole theory of change, which I'm not going to get through, but the way that we work is we tell the transit agencies, who we sort of regulate, sort of don't, we're mostly their funder, this is kind of what we want. We wrote our own general transit feed specification minimum guidelines that we want the transit agencies to aspire to do. So we publish the data, we publish the guidelines, and then on the vendor side, we also want the equipment and the software to be interoperable. So we've been broadcasting that to the industry, right? That this is what we're doing. Establish clear expectations. Hunter built is building data pipelines to assess the progress of the agencies meeting GTFS, and we send them reports every month and all sorts of stuff. And then we provide technical assistance when we find a problem. We call you up, and we call you up as a transit agency, and we try to help you better your general transit feed specification. And a result of all three of those things, we've learned where the gaps are. And it turns out that transit is so far behind that there are literally products that are missing for transit agencies to meet certain standards. And it's such a fragmented market that nobody's going to build that. So somebody needs to cause those things to come into being, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. So on contactless open payments, which is our second pillar, this is our vision. You should be able to buy transit just like you buy coffee. And why are we finally not doing that in the United States? You should just be able to use the thing that's in your top of your wallet. We're not saying cash should go away, but most people do pay for most things with debit cards, and they should be able to pay for transit that way as well. So brief explanation about the banking system and how to do this. It's really simple. We have Clipper cards and all this other stuff that we actually don't need, that is very counterproductive. To be a merchant and to accept debit and credit cards, you need three things. You need a processing bank that's going to move money from you, the merchant, your account to the customer, from the customer's account to your account. That's what the bank does. Then you need a point of sale terminal, just like you see at every coffee shop. And you need some software that runs it, that connects to the bank. In the case of transit, that software has to be a little bit special because it has to do arithmetic, because some of us charge by distance. That's all you need. And if you have those three things, then you can work the way the rest of the world works. This is a very simplified diagram of the way the entire global banking system works. It's pretty simple. There's the customer and their bank is who issues your debit or credit card. That's the left side is the customer side, and on the right side is the merchant side, which is, in our case, the transit provider. There's the crap that they need to connect, and then there's their bank, which holds their account. And Visa and MasterCard have built these networks that allow all of the banks on-ramps and off-ramps, and all of the merchants on-ramps. It's that simple. It's just a circuit. And it's run and built by Visa and MasterCard, and transit is not part of it, but we are making it part of it. because that's a standard that all runs on a standard called EMV, which is Europay, MasterCard, Visa. The EMV code, the standards company, has been around since the 80s. And every piece of hardware, every piece of software, every service that is involved in a financial bank card transaction is required to be certified by EMV code. So some of the best engineers work on that network, and it's highly standardized, really great. So the way that we help transit agencies do this is that when we discover a product that they need, we use the state of California's buying power to buy those products for them, or at least negotiate contracts that they can use. And we put the contracts up, and the transit agencies can haul those contracts down and meet the standards. And so that's our website, the California Mobility Marketplace, and all of our contracts are open nationally. So transit's a really small industry, and we really need to think about all of the transit, all 3,000 of them, if we're going to get any kind of scale and reductions in costs. So California's contracts are open nationally. If we're successful, and we're being successful, becoming a merchant means that you now, on the bank rails, now means that you can get merchant services from Visa and MasterCard and everybody who's involved in that system about your business intelligence, right? So most merchants get not just their transaction data at the end of the month, they can also avail themselves about other information about their customers, which is way more information than you can get out of a Clipper card, right? And but we don't know what those merchant services will be for transit. So a lot of that is a data play. So Hunter's team is building that too. We certainly at the moment are giving the transit agencies that do this their transaction data, and we are actively working with Visa and MasterCard and the banks to add other data sources and figure out what it's going to do to help, how we need to help transit agencies run their business as a business and not just as a social service. If you move the transit agencies onto the bank rails, you immediately get this question and an accusation that it's a white collar play because poor people use cash. So having been a poor person myself, and gotten food stamps and all that, I think that I'm pretty sure that poor people don't always want to use cash. I think it's because they don't have a lot of options. And now, fortunately, because of companies like the Cash App and Venmo and PayPal, there are low-cost options that aren't injurious, so that under and unbanked people can become part of the financial ecosystem. And as a state agency, we are using our power to lean on the banking industry to make sure that there's just as much competition for the accounts of under and unbanked people as there is for pretty much everybody in this room, right? In other countries, you don't have to have a minimum balance to have a basic payment account. You can walk into any bank, and the rest of the world basically requires banks to provide those accounts for people. We don't do that in the United States, and it's a real problem if you're trying to do any kind of systems work in the United States. So we're trying to solve that because we're super ambitious. Then finally, on the automating discounts thing, the fact that everything is run locally, all 797 transit agencies are run separately by their own general managers and their own board of directors. That means that everybody interprets everything differently, so it's chaos. And that happens to be a problem if you're trying to answer the question of what is the product and how much does it cost. So we looked at 191 transit agencies' policies for eligibility, and we discovered that there were, amongst those 191, there were 83 different definitions of senior. 17 different definitions of seniors. And then on top of that, different eligibility requirements. What this means in real life is that thing on Google Maps, you take your trip, you pick your transit trip, there's a dollar amount at the end of it. If you're a senior, there's no way to know what that dollar amount is because of stuff like this, right? If you're going across agencies and they charge different prices and they define senior differently, you are basically destroying the customer's understanding of what the product is and how much it costs, right? It's like, do you want customers or not here, right? So we built some software with the California Department of Technology and login.gov, which is a federal program, and we started with seniors. And so if you're participating in Cal ITP agency, you get this software that allows your customers to pass a part of their eligibility, the fact that they're over 65, to the payment services provider of the transit agency. And then as long as you tap the same bank card, you get your discount every time. And if the transit agency next door also goes open loop, you're done. You can tap your card on that transit agency and you'll get your discount there. And the point of this, aside from removing a lot of headache, is that things about the car, like driver's licenses and the disabled blue placards, are portable, right? If I give you a driver's license in California, you can use it in Massachusetts. Vice versa, same thing with the blue placard, right? You can pull your placard off and bring it with you to Massachusetts. That's what people expect. So we need to do that for transit. Transit benefits need to be portable, right? So that the system can have the same look and feel around the country. So we're not planners. I like planners as people. I don't want to work with planners. We don't plan things. I mean, which isn't to say that we don't plan things, but we're not professional planners. We do things. So we don't do pilots, we do demonstrations. Bank card payments have been around for some time. You were not piloting them, they work. So we sign up agencies that are willing, and we connect them with the products that are available, and they do demonstrations. So our first agency was Monterey Salinas Transit. For a couple of years now, you've been able to go pay with your bank card down there. We also put point-to-sale terminals on SAC-RT's light rails. This is the first American rail operator to accept bank cards. We did 2 adjacent agencies in Santa Barbara that connect with each other, and one of them was so delighted they made a little movie. So I'll end here, but here were just some of my ideas about things that would be really great to collaborate with you on. There are probably more standards than just the GTFS one that you're going to hear about. So what are they? What else should we be thinking about in transit? Where are there more barriers? Like we have a pretty good process for finding some of the gaps of what's missing for small and rural agencies, but there are probably more. So come work for us, come work with us to do that research, or work with us not by working for us. Then if you happen to know a local transit agency, whether they're in California or elsewhere, encourage them to check out the MSAs, because we offer products that are cheaper than they can probably get in their own state. Then sort of building out the merchant services for transit, and then of course anything else you can think of. So that's it for me. I've built the framework that allows us to get the transit agencies to produce GTFS. Cue Hunter.
Right.
Fortunately, Hunter and I are both the fastest speaking people at Caltrans.
It's a real competition. All right, Berkeley ITS seminar. Let's hope this works. Can I?
So the general transit feed specification is the only data standard in transit so far. It's a product of Google and TriMet. It's about 15 years old. So it's sort of it was meant to let transit compete with Waze. The stuff that you can do with Waze, can you do with transit? So that's what GTFS is, and there's a real-time version of it, which compares your schedule to what you're actually doing on the street.
Yeah, so as Gillian said, let's say we did all of this at every transit agency magically, and we turned it from a disaggregated pile of operators into a real system. What can we start doing with that information? And thankfully, using the GTFS RT information, we've really been able to case study that. So one of the programs we've been running internally, which was the Better Buses campaign, which we've stolen from a lot of our peer agencies. So you may recognize it, but it's not a bad idea. We should be doing it everywhere. So we've been jokingly calling this the 100 routes to Better Buses. Cue the pun joke. But we all know this. If you look at Caltrans' strategic plan, non-functional transit would kind of harm, our goals around safety, climate action, the multimodal network somewhat obviously, and equity. SB 743, that's the famous LOS to VMT transition bill, commits us to a 15% reduction over the 1990 VMT level statewide. CARB's latest scoping plan, I think, has us down 20-30%. Anyways, we need to reduce the number of vehicles miles traveled. In Caltrans' own CAPTI framework, this is extremely important. I think we can also basically just agree the bus is important. However, what makes a good bus? If you ask this question of like, what is an effective transit network? We do not have good standards about this. And I know people are like, okay, what are the models for that? So kind of pulling back out, for the roadway network, that is the collection of roads, collector streets, state highways, there is an extremely robust and standardized infrastructure for this. On the right here, we see a screenshot from PEMS, which is the Performance Management System, originally a Berkeley product. As I see some nods, you should all be ashamed of yourselves. No, but I came here not to bury PEMS, but to praise it, which is to say, we have these multi-million-dollar systems. We have robust frameworks. We initiate new projects every time we see even the smallest thing wrong on the roadway network. Like, go look in these project initiation documents. You will see stuff like a 15-second delay on an on-ramp, resulting in millions of dollars being spent to fix that. But you will not see anything like that for active transportation and transit. I'm here to talk about transit, but it does definitely lag into active transportation as well. And what I would suggest is we need level of service back, which is to say we need a level of service for the bus. What is a good bus? What does a functioning transit network look like? You know, a colleague at Caltrans told me, I think, one of my favorite quotes yesterday, which is, engineering is a license to look something up. Which is to say, engineers love standards, and planners do not necessarily produce a lot of standards. So we have a gap. There is nothing like, this is the classic LOS score. This does not exist for bus routes. We cannot go, I cannot say, you know, the SF Muni Mission Local is a B grade bus. Getting it to an A will take this amount of dollars investment and time. We cannot say this network is delivering. We have measures, we have metrics, but it has not been standardized. Nobody has said, this is good performance, this is poor performance. The roads people did this, and they built a system off of it. So again, kind of pulling out, why is this all important? We are not on track to reduce VMT, and we have a ton of room to grow in getting more customers. And I think one of the reasons we do not have a lot of people riding transit is not great. Less than 10% of transit trips in the state are competitive with drive times. Like, people are going to choose to drive because it is more efficient. This is not just like a weird pandemic thing. This is definitely, you know, this ongoing decline in transit ridership. And this all sort of like leads to the big picture problem here of like, if our transit network falls apart, we don't meet our climate and equity goals. Like, that is a point blank true statement. We can't really argue that. So what's been going wrong, and how do we kind of look at this? Which is that as we've been throwing more money at transit than ever before. There's more money for capital, and the number of operating dollars continues to increase from like 2008 to present. However, we continue to see a decline in the actual supply, that is the number of revenue miles driven, which is to say, the bus is getting slower. I am a child of Hollywood. I grew up in the 90s. There was gonna be a speed GIF in this presentation, which is all to say, speed is actually the sort of critical metric that we've determined as our group to focus on for performance. So why are speeds important? And you may argue, you know, one, the average bus in California is going less than 12 miles an hour. That means the average is less than 12 miles an hour, which means that there are buses, and we will be talking about a lot of them, that are doing walking pace trips. And I, you know, which is not good. So slow trips worsens the rider experience. Slow trips mean inherently less frequent service. There's this relationship. If a route takes an hour and 10 minutes to drive instead of an hour, you now need to commute an extra 10% of labor. Your labor cost has gone up to deliver the same service end to end. Now costs more money. You may have heard that we have a driver shortage going on right now. Speeding up the bus is one way to efficiently get more out of each driver. Not that. And this slow and frequent service, you know, is something that nobody's going to ride, which means people are going to choose to drive instead, which means VMT goes up, and VMT going up is bad. And this is not just sort of a like, this is a during the pandemic thing. This is just a long-term longitudinal trend in both California, even on our rail side, which is deeply embarrassing that there was a 2% decline in rail speeds between 2010 and 2018. So, we can see this. And again, we were making progress post-recession, and then you see this decline in service. So what have we been doing about it? This is the Better Buses Challenge, which is what we started to kick off that with. And the first thing is, can we daylight the problem? Where are buses? So we have now committed as Caltrans to publishing the speed of every bus in the entire state. And so that is available to you publicly. You can go download that and get it. Right now we're at closer to 100 operators, more than 99. Again, the only way we have this is because GTFS RT exists. There's a big black box that, for the purposes of this talk, that takes GTFS RT data and turns it into speeds data. That occupies a non-trivial amount of all of our time here, but let's just pretend that exists as a box. So yeah, here's Bakersfield, and you can see one thing I always love to point out on the site. How fast do we think, you can kind of see the legend on the top right, but the green segments on that is 20 miles an hour on average. It is not careening around Keanu Reeves style across Los Angeles. So I'm just going to do a quick demo. I feel like this is hopefully so this is a live demo, which is always terrifying. So let's see if I can make this window a little bigger. Who in District 4 do we want to pick on? Somebody, tell me a transit agency.
AC Transit.
AC Transit. There we go. Who's got a bus route on AC Transit that they love to hate?
52A.
52A. All right. Let's go. Who before this loads, because it's gonna take AC Transit's a little big. It takes a little while to load. What do we think the slowest segment on AC Transit's 52A is? 10 miles an hour plus minus. Minus. 5 miles an hour plus minus. Minus. All right, let's see if we can find a segment that is sub 5 miles an hour. Where does the 52A run? I am a Southern Californian.
Runs down College Avenue from campus.
Okay, so let's go. That's kind of campus.
South of campus.
Right at the end.
All right. This one? Yeah. All right.
So
What
there
are
we
we?
go.
What are we doing here? That's not too bad. It's a
That's
10
not too
mile an
bad.
hour segment.
There's 9.
9. Here's a problem corner. 5.5. Not the 51B, but 8. 6.1 on average. 4.7. There we go. Right around there. Which is to say, the bus is too slow. So. Sure, I am not a civil engineer. I am reasonably certain the problem of figuring out how to separate pedestrian traffic from bus traffic on roadways is a solvable one in the field of civil engineering.
How are you measuring speed? Are you including stops in the speed?
This is attempts as best as possible to remove dwell time, but it will include red lights. Not 100% possible, but as best as possible. As I said, kind of.
Have you looked at the TSP places? Has it helped?
We have an ongoing research project related to that. We encourage more research into that subject. Yes and no is kind of the answer I can give on transit signal priority, which is it will help someplace. It can also start helping and then not help. There was a report published on the San Pablo transit signal priority where it started out helping and then it stopped. This is kind of not totally my area of expertise on but is definitely an active, we can actually look at what are the statewide impacts of TSP with this type of data, which is very cool. And important. Just to kind of put this into context of how much delay is going on the state highway network, we calculated, Caltrans itself is causing a lot of the problems inside. This is for our own internal performance metrics, but you can see every, 30 hours of delay summed up per route for routes that will come by the state highway network. So how are we looking at improving this and looking at this data? So we have a per district approach because that's important for Caltrans, and we've kind of split the opportunities into 3 different types of ways transit service can be improved. The first is a transit corridor improvement. That's to say this is a multi-mile segment where speeds are uniformly slow and you probably need a larger project to kind of fix it. The next is spots. I cannot tell you how many intersections and on-ramps significantly delay buses across the state because there isn't TSP or there isn't a queue jump or whatever, or there isn't bus on shoulder. And then finally, the roads get you a lot of places transit cannot. So really working to identify, due to the way FTA sends out money, there's a lot of stuff for intercity buses. So identifying the gaps in where we can say, and other state DOTs, Colorado have really done a good job of saying like, hey, this is somewhere where we need to run transit as a state DOT because it's an intercity or multi-city gap, and where are those route gaps where we could encourage transit. So going to first category, the corridors, the example types of treatment you can see are bus lanes, bus on shoulder, boarding islands and stop improvement, contactless payments reduces your dwell time. So how do we find all those in the state? Bus routes with an average speed of less than 12 miles an hour and at least 10% of the trips that are run during a given day are competitive with a car driving it on a given time, which is to say, if transit was prioritized, it has a significant opportunity to be sped up. And we also threw out any of the sort of circulatory or loop routes because there are a lot of those, and it just kind of screwed up the methodology. So an example, Caltrans example, sorry, not the Fish 1A, but is Bay Area, is San Pablo Avenue. This is a Caltrans state highway. It looks like a local road. It has a bus about every 6 minutes during the peak period, and currently has rapid transit signal priority, but the average bus speed is below 8 miles an hour. So this is definitely an area for improvement, and you could eliminate 32 hours of delay on a typical day. Another one in District 7, 42 buses an hour, bus every 5 minutes or so. You could eliminate 20 hours of delay by getting it up to a normal speed. And this is just the state highway network segment. It converts to a local road after. Going towards hotspots, again, these are like quarter miles, quarter miles, a lot, I will say, are intersections where you've got on-ramps and off-ramps. Again, slightly different methodology to just pick up these smaller segments. Out in Santa Barbara, this is not a big, dense urban corridor. Our last two were obviously in LA and the Bay Area. This is Santa Barbara. But Santa Barbara, right near the 101, any UCSB alums here at some point? Okay, maybe. There's a State and Hollister intersection with the 101, and they do 73 buses an hour because it's right next to their main transit center during peak period. So that's like really solid surface, and you could eliminate 18 hours of delay total for that on average a day. This is Sacramento. This is sort of the classic. There's a freeway kind of down here, the Sacramento Beltway. Speeds, you can see the bus is actually doing kind of okay, 12, 13 miles an hour, and then just drops through these signalized intersections here. And you get 4 hours of delay sort of cleaned up. And then finally, state highway network service gaps. This is much more rural where transit does not go. And we're looking for 10-mile corridors with no transit options, where transit options is 2x the service time. Sort of the classic example of this is District 5 and the Central Coast, where it's technically possible to do a lot of trips with transit, but it is not very pleasant. So if you can see, if you're going from Templeton, which is north of Atascadero, to Cambria on the coast, it's only about a 35-minute drive, and that road there is a state highway network. Or 2 hours and 7 minutes via transit with 3 transfers, and you have to go all the way down to Slough and back out to the coast. This is where the roads go and transit doesn't. Certainly an area for programming improvements. How deep can we get on a particular issue? This is probably where we start to see some of the limits of the data, which is kind of fun to point out. But this is a case study we've been calling a better bus on Lincoln Boulevard, Lincoln Boulevard, State Route 1 in Los Angeles County. It has been designated for transit priority in the 2001, 2009, and 2020 Metro Long Range Transportation Plan. It is included as a Measure M project, the local option sales tax in the area. The city of Santa Monica has already implemented bus lanes on the city control portion that they made Caltrans relinquish. There's an upcoming shop paving project that they're planning peak-only bus lanes. So again, we've been promising to the residents, and all of our planners have done all of their planning documents since I was a 10-year-old. Do I remember what year I was born? That we would be building transit on this corridor and making it a priority transit corridor. We've even said since 2009, BRT is coming on this corridor, and we have done nothing to do it. So this is why planning can be bad if we don't do anything after it. So if we look at the corridor here, we've kind of broken it into 3 areas off the speed map. The top blue area is the city-controlled area. The middle blue is where Caltrans is planning an existing project, and the green is where Caltrans is like, oh, we're not necessarily going to do anything yet. So, and again, out of a just standard shop project. So the Route R3, which is the bus on that, there's a 0.4 mile segment that has a 5.2 mile an average peak travel speed. This is not included as part of the transit project somehow because it's outside of scope, because it's not a dedicated transit project, it's a dedicated paving project, first of all. Existing bus lanes are proposed as peak only, but we actually see lots of congestion throughout the entire day. So what does this look like turned into like an actual standardized, attempted a standardized metric? This is not like an official methodology, but this is what we've come up with, which is to say we can look at delay one of 2 ways. Either we can look at it via speed, which is like how delayed are you based on some reference speed, or how delayed are you based on the schedule. We had started out doing schedule-based delay metrics, but it discovered there's something kind of inherently wrong with that, which is to say planners are going to try to make the schedule accurately reflect reality. So as bus speeds would get slower, schedules get padded and extended. So you actually often see the implementation of the current proposal would increase schedule-based delay accidentally because the bus would actually slow down to essentially accommodate the fact of schedule. So that's probably not a great metric. So we've kind of switched to mostly focusing on speed-based metrics, which is one of the reasons why it'd be very important to establish like what is the reference bus speed for an urban corridor. Nobody has published on that. Please do. It would make my life a lot easier. And we can see there are huge amounts of savings. If you do an expanded bus lane for all day, you'd be reducing about 20 hours of delay if it's assuming this. So who does this benefit? This is why it's super crucial when we start getting standardized ridership data. One of our team members looked in the Santa Monica Big Blue Plus annual report to pull these numbers. This is not standardized. But you can see that 73% of Big Blue Plus riders identify as a minority, 64% are low income. If you're familiar with that area of LA, that is not exactly like an equity focused zone if you look at a map of the city of LA of like Venice and Santa Monica, but the riders are incredibly low income and it serves equity focused communities. Bringing it out to that classic person hours of delay metric that people love to talk, 50,000 person hours of delay, again, super ballparky for a lot of reasons. This is because we don't have detailed ridership information. If you did this, we estimate you could run for the same operating cost 25 additional trips a day on the Big Blue Bus, which is an effective adding, adding an additional bus each hour. So the service frequency would increase pretty dramatically. And people might actually want to take this bus if it was actually traveling faster than walking pace. So that's what performance metrics for the bus we think should look like. This is not standardized. This is highly specialized. This is complex. We should standardize this. We need a massive program of improving our transit operations across the state. We're trying to do it a little bit at Caltrans. It involves a lot of work with both Caltrans and our local partners. I know I'm running a little late on time and we wanted to take questions, so I'm going to try to wrap it up. But the thing I will mention before I wrap it up is if this is interesting to you, we are constantly hiring. We have 3 members of our team here who know what it's like to work for me. They probably don't hate it that much, or at least they haven't quit yet, so we'll see. But I would really encourage you, especially as some of you graduate and think about, Caltrans has probably not been the destination employer among graduates, but like I definitely encourage you to apply. Feel free to reach out to any of us. And yeah, thank you.
Questions, comments, complaints, zingers, please, Allison.
So this is great, really important work. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you're thinking about legibility in terms of these metrics, because I imagine part of what you're trying to do is illuminate a problem in a way that decision makers will understand and comprehend easily. And so kind of what is your target audience as you're developing these metrics, and how has that influenced the types of figures that you're focusing on in terms of quantifying the problem?
I think one of the reasons we've kind of ended up focusing on speed versus more complex stuff like projected VMT reduction is speed's kind of intuitive, and it makes it very easy to, like, when we have to sell this internally and try to sell it eventually to the public, asking somebody the question of, would you ever ride a bus that goes approximately the speed you can walk at if you are a fast walker? Kind of clicks in a way that, like, if we did this project, we'd see X amount of person hours of delay reduced, followed by an X amount of reduction in VMT, which is actually like 0.0005% of our regional VMT. So that's why we've kind of settled in on speed. I am certainly interested to see, as transit performance becomes a more important thing to measure because of all the reasons I kind of laid out at the beginning of the talk, is like, where do we end up in a community in standardizing it? Like, this is the thing that the point I was trying to drive home in the beginning is, like, roadway performance was regimented and still is somewhat regimented. We just know we're not supposed to focus on it anymore. But transit performance was never really cared about in the same way. So there's not that huge body of literature, we kind of said 16 miles an hour was basically picked out of a hat as, like, it's kind of what BRT speeds looks like when we looked across some of our data set. It's not, I was talking to a former colleague who's at FS Muni, and they said their target's 12. And, like, they say 12, 16 for measuring is, like, again, yes, it's 4 miles an hour. It's not a huge difference. But in aggregate, it is a huge difference. And, like, also San Francisco, dense urban area, Caltrans has to kind of cover our areas. So it's definitely, like, a really active area. Both, is it speed? Is it VMT? Is it person hours of delay? Or is it, and then even within speeds, like, what speeds, certainly, so there's a lot of areas to kind of go at this problem.
I would say from a culture perspective, our first audience is really the internal audience of Caltrans leadership, right? So we bring this to the districts and say, this is a good project, try this project. We're trying that attempt. And then there's also just simply surfacing data at this level of complexity. So that's a sort of a twofer with management, right? They're, like, shamed that the performance is so bad, so obviously bad. And, there's really good data, like this team is producing data. Then the transit operators, the more sophisticated transit operators who are involved in capital projects and have the connections to make capital projects with their local muni or whatever, are now empowered with data like this. So the agencies have been basically voiceless with anything that they can count, right? There's always like, transit is suffering and it's a fiscal cliff and give us more money, right? Like, that's what you hear over and over and over again. And it's like, okay, here's an actual metric, right? That people appreciate. So that would be a secondary audience. I would love for it to be other places. I'm not a communications person, but we both sort of firmly believe that getting the data out there is the first piece. Takes a village. Please, in the back. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on the question about speed as the focus for the metric. I think it makes sense that we want to sort of focus on metrics that we can measure, right? So this is something that from the GTFS data, you're probably getting location coordinates and measuring the distance between those GPS points. and how fast the time stamp is between the two, and you can get the speed from that. It makes sense. My question is like, what other kind of metrics did you consider? Perhaps like accessibility, like at least on the transportation planning side. I'm definitely hearing that the planners are kind of the bad guys in this story. I'm not a planner, but like, I mean, the shift seems to have been more from like mobility and a focus on speed and throughput to accessibility. Don't we really care about whether people can get to their destinations and, you know, in the amount of time that the costs, various costs, not just time, to get there that's reasonable, as opposed to just like, if we focus on speed as the main metric, does that mean we just want buses to be going super fast? Like, is like 60 miles an hour? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and there's safety issues associated with speed. I mean, if we want to just solve for speed and we want our buses to go faster, aren't there, you know, safety issues, accidents,
Sure.
et cetera, associated with that? So I just wonder about the focus on speed. Did you consider accessibility as
Well,
as
accessibility is a term of art in transportation, right? That's for people with disabilities, is the accessibility. So I don't think you mean that here.
Only that, right?
Yeah.
Accessibility
Right. You
is
mean
like,
you mean the English version of accessibility, right? The non-term of art. Yeah.
Yeah, so yes, and I think one, accessibility metrics are also correlated with, so like we also use, like we have another group inside us that uses like the Conveil. We do capital project evaluation based on access to opportunity metrics. Absolutely a key part for like a long range big capital project. However, the buses are too slow. Like this is when we looked at, could we, you know, sure, accessibility is a great metric. We did look at it. It did not make sense for our use case of like trying to bring smaller operational fixes that are politically sellable. Like if you're talking about how do we evaluate the costs of two big new lines and we're trying to decide, you know, which project A or project B, then you want to look at an access to opportunity metric. But when we're looking at how do we improve the network that exists today that has buses running on a given hour, and how do we avoid this transit fixes cliff, accessibility was really, speeds was really where we ended up having something that was legible and could be explained. Every metric has its place, and yeah, any metric taken to, you know, you run into Goodhart's laws problems on any sort of metric, which is any metric that becomes a target ceases to have utility as a metric, but it was not, you know, I'm definitely really curious to see, you know, the planning community in transport planning world seems to have been very excited about access to opportunity. Access to opportunity is a really great metric for big capital project expenditures. Access to opportunity is kind of a terrible metric, or the way we do access to opportunity doesn't necessarily do a great job of accounting for system reliability at the current point. Which is to say, like, I don't see a lot of implementations of access to opportunity. I could be missing them. I have not seen everybody's implementation that does a good job of accounting for, like, well, okay, I'll give a good example of access to opportunity metrics that on reliability, which is like, yes, I technically live within 20 minutes of Burbank Airport, which I had to get to this morning because there's a Metrolink train that comes once every not many number of hours. However, I drove to the airport this morning because there was not a train that actually delivered me there in the right amount of time. And that is further made worse because we have no good metrics to measure the sort of reliability and variance with the standardized data we have, where it's like, what is the likelihood my trip will complete in a good amount, in the target amount of time based on a scheduled access to opportunity metric? Which is to say, like, how do you account for like ghost buses or like unreliable systems or slow systems in your access to opportunity metrics? And how does the MOE, because like, again, the way I like to think about it is my bus is delayed, you know, if a bus is delayed 10 minutes on 10% of its trips, that is to say somebody who commutes on that 5 days a week is late to work 1 out of every 10 times if the bus, you know, comes every that. So it starts to get into this like really good for the long range horizon, but when you start looking at these shorter term, more operational improvements, you get into this pile of complexity that's not fun to solve through, and the Gordian knot solve for that is like, can we get a few extra miles an hour here and there?
And the fundamental thing is you have to provide a good service. Like, what is accessibility? That doesn't have any, like, you need to provide a good, high quality service, right? And we don't do that. And we were, before the pandemic, we were at 5% in the Bay Area, 5% of trips were on transit on a good day. So, if we were a product company, we'd be bankrupt. We'd be out of business, right? Like, it's just not a viable option. We are losing, and we lost faster during the pandemic. So you got to start somewhere. And these big planning processes that we have are like just awful, right? Like, just get in there and work the problem and make a whole bunch of small changes, right, to improve the service. Be really tactical. Please.
Yeah, thank you for the very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it. And maybe to bridge both perspectives, I think that what would be helpful is not to see the speeds, but to use the number of jobs that would be accessible
Sure.
within X minutes
Sure.
as speeds improve. That is, I think, the accessibility measure is kind of thinking about how many opportunities open up now that the
Yes.
buses are coming faster. And I think that is very legible to a decision maker, because now within half an hour, if I speed the buses, I can get to 20,000 buses more,
Right.
or jobs more,
Right.
which is very tangible.
Right.
And would be kind of a different way of thinking about how speed allows you to get to places.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, and having been in the decision makers room, at least in Caltrans, I'm not going to say other agencies may be more sophisticated. I'll speak to my own agency, which is to say, our agency decision makers are not yet at that level of sophistication.
Right. They don't care.
I hate to be, and I don't want to say I dumbed it down, but I'm going to say we simplified it because there's that. I also think going on a data level, there are two axes to the access to opportunity metric that are not yet sufficiently explored. Which is to say, access to opportunity, one, spatially, and two, temporally. And then the z-axis of reliability, which is to say, and once you start trying to account for all three of those, which are all three parts of a successful trip, is it reliable? Did it deliver it in the time I needed to it? And does it go where I need to go? The metric is, I have not yet figured out a way, and I don't think it's my job to figure out a way, thankfully, to deliver that legibility. It's like 13% of the time you're able to get to this job this many times, and there's a 20% chance the trip is sufficiently delayed. So we do have to kind of cut through that Gordian knot, which is tough. And this is probably not the best way to do it,
Yeah.
but it is a way to do it.
And I love the question about reliability.
Yeah.
Because, one way we think about it is in terms of the behavior of the users, the behavioral response. That's what schedules become really important. Because that bus that comes 10 minutes late, you'll be late for your job, or the one that leaves early. It's even worse, right?
I mean, there's a great
Yeah.
research paper out of LA that's like, how many jobs require you to have a car? And the classic word in LA is access to reliable transportation may not include metro. And the number of jobs, I've seen job postings for government jobs that include that language, which is crazy. I don't know how they got it through HR, but, the service reliability is super, super critical, especially when serving lower income populations who are working jobs that are frankly, I did not decide that jobs are going to, discriminate against people who don't have cars. But I will tell you, in most of the state, employers discriminate against people who don't have cars. And that is directly contradictory to our BMT and multimodal and equity goals.
Please.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things you can do that simultaneously make buses faster and cars slower. And from the standpoint of your VMT target, that sounds quite desirable. Now, I suspect that Caltrans has a limited tolerance for that kind of thinking, but how do they think about that?
I would almost argue we don't think about that at a systemic level. I think the biggest point I can make about my presentation is we do not have a system for transit improvements. We're just barely touching at measuring the problem. And now we're trying to go from measuring the problem to beginning an improvement program on it. And we don't even have fully buy-in or budget on that. So, I do think one of the appeals of Caltrans versus, say, the way the discussion has sort of resolved, I throw on I used to work at a local agency hat. I have been yelled at a community meeting before. I'm one of very few data scientists who can say I've been yelled at a community meeting before. Not the most fun experience. I sympathize with every planner who has to deal with that. It's not great. Is that Caltrans does not care about, or is not statutorily required to care about the sort of local process. We are required to care about the statewide network and the statewide targets. So when we talk about an improvement program that is going to, by somewhat necessity, result in better multimodal speeds, better active transportation access, and worse single occupancy vehicle speeds, or access, whatever you want to say it is, our agency is directly tied to our statewide goals. Our governance is the legislature and the governor, so you're less likely to have an individual project blow up and turn into sort of a nightmare because of local parochial political opposition. Given the fact that a lot of local political opposition existed to the freeway building, and we steamrolled that. The statutory authorities, the statutory levers are all buried in the California State Code to kind of do a lot of ambitious projects that may result in that, which has historically been harder to do at a local level, but has only been done at the local level because they're the only ones who had the ambition to try it, and Caltrans is not.
So we're sort of the right whipping boy, right? The fact that we were like bulldozers before, like somebody has to do it, right? We all know that we have to go in this direction, right? For California to succeed, somebody has to make the hard moves. There's one agency that can do it, and that's Caltrans, because we have it already. So we're trying. But I think you're right. I was going to say on your land use point, we also don't do, joint land use and transportation planning in this state, at least at the state level. That'd be really great too, right? Like the housing people don't talk to the transpo people much. We're trying. But that would be another new
They did pass a
frontier.
law to make us do it.
Yeah.
And I am 100% not joking. There is a law requiring that there has to be a joint meeting of the Housing Board and the California Transportation Commission.
Well, more questions, comments, complaints, please.
I have a question to follow up on that one. I think it's really interesting that you guys are tackling this at the state level, right? Because it's massive problem, like this issue of like transit fragmentation. And I'm just wondering, like, having been at this for a while now, what would you say are sort of the advantages or disadvantages of working on this problem from a state level? And I guess sort of, underlying that is I'm not even sure how many transit agencies there are in the state. It must be a ton. But I also imagine that, how many are there in the major metro areas like LA and SF? When you say California, is it mostly in like the Bay Area? And I mean, the rural transit is really an interesting issue.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, that might be an advantage of doing this from like a state level.
Yes.
Because rural transit is so important for people who could be completely isolated, have no mobility in these non-urban areas to get to where they need to go. I'm not sure if speed's always the metric there, right, in rural areas. That's the
Right.
question.
No.
But I'll leave that aside. And also in the urban areas, there are also a lot of natural partners and allies for you guys, I would imagine, like Seamless Bay Area, MTC. Are you guys working? Because they're also trying to overcome fragmentation, make transit more seamless here in the Bay Area. Are you also working together with these local?
We don't work with them because
regional?
they really want to do a whole lot of complex fare policy, and they're really focused on keeping Clipper. And I just, we're not, Clipper is a disaster. We need to go to bank cards. But so we would work with them, I think, where we can find commonality. It's not like we don't work with them, sort of. But the advantage at the state level, and yes, you're right about the rural agencies, is that you can see things that the local agencies really actually like at the state level. Like vendor problems, for instance. It's a really locked-in industry with a lot of bad contracts, and we can see the problems that, oh, you have this problem? Well, everybody who has this vendor X has that problem. Would you like us to get in a room with you and the vendor and say, pressure on the vendor? So that's a really big advantage. It has helped the transit agencies start to trust us that there is a value in technical assistance at the state level. And the small and rural agencies are called 5311F or 5311 agencies. They don't get their money directly from the federal government. They get it through us. So each DOT has a fiduciary responsibility to the small and rural agencies, and they really can't do things for themselves. So they actually like help. In the urban areas, that's where the resources are, and they have lobbyists and all that sort of stuff. So the urban areas basically would like us to, give them the money in a paper bag and shut up, right? So, nonetheless, the changes in the technology have reduced the costs and improved the performance of so many things that you have enough of a market share in the small agencies by working with all of them. You can produce fast and light projects that also work for the large agencies. Who knew, right? So that's our strategy, is like really focus on the small and rural, and kind of work on the big guys. Those are big advantages.
Going to just like numbers, I think, depending on how you count, there's going to be somewhere between 180 and 220 to 30 fixed route agencies in the state. That being said, 80% of the rides are delivered on the 5 biggest. Return post-COVID has been super uneven among those 5 biggest. I think the large agency with the best return ridership percentage is San Diego. So, which is like, California discussion tends to be like the LA District 4 and District 7 in Caltrans parlance. And I want to give a shout out to our District 11 colleagues, and like, because that seems to have built a partnership model that, starting to kind of churn. Advantages and disadvantages. Advantages at the state level is the scope and being able to align everything. The biggest disadvantage is the state is the opposite of agile. Turning that ship, government is like a ship. Turning it takes a really long time, but you sure don't want to be standing in the way when it's under power. So, getting the shift, I think people are here in this room are probably familiar with like the swift shift in CEQA from LS to BMT was like a decade-long project that is not fully cleaned up, So I think our biggest disadvantage is really the speed at which we move is absolutely too slow to deal with the challenges we're being asked to deal with. That's what keeps me up at night.
One thing that's super unsexy, but that I spend a lot of my time on, is procurement, right? So states have this God card that the federal government has, which is we can buy things on behalf of others, right? And locals can't do that. And procurement is very expensive in 2 regards. One is you have to know exactly what you need and be able to write a good scope of work. And if you're a small agency trying to get something technical, you don't know necessarily what to do. So you can write a very bad RFP. And then also the act of procurement itself is expensive and time consuming. So most of the small transit agencies don't have a procurement department. So they really don't buy things. They kind of inherit them from others. And that means that their product gaps and that they get really crappy products. So the advantage of the state is if we figure out what the gap is, we could just make contracts if we could get the right thing, because we can solve those 2 problems, and we can put it up there for them at an incredible price that they could never buy it at themselves because they're this big and we're the fourth largest economy in the world now, right? So it's just a different thing. And it's starting to work with open payments. Like agencies all over the country are starting to buy off of the California contracts. So I think, in the next year, I think that we'll see a lot of agencies taking bank cards.
Yeah.
And that's directly a state power. If we can keep that, I want to have a Sears catalog of transit products up on our website that are all code compliant. I just don't know what all the codes are yet.
Yeah, I think like just data point, a payment validator for LA Metro for their all-door boarding project cost them $3,259. The cheapest validator that California procured for any bus is $950, $951 maybe.
Yeah. And ours are open,
and
and there's a proprietary.
Ours, those are technically open, the open ones,
Oh,
the
okay.
slightly, but they don't work with the rest of the metro. It's complicated. Again, it's complicated and it's BSE, and they have planners are not the villains. Planners are being asked to do the wrong thing. And it's because planners are kind of naturally good at like gap filling, and they're not planning because as I pointed out in that long range plan, if planners were actually planning, that long range Lincoln Boulevard would not be a problem because it's been identified, it would have been turned into a project, and it would have been executed on. And we don't have those cycles, we don't have the procurements in place. So how much can we commoditize all the stuff that is currently bespoke and complex, so we can actually focus on the real problems and plan for the communities we want? That's the stuff I will never be good at, nor would I even really want to care about what are the communities we want, what are the futures, but that's not the conversation planners get to have right now, which is a shame, because I think in other places where you've figured out how to turn the back office, turn the procurement, turn the operations into things that just work, you actually get to say what is the community we want, what is the shape of it, what are the areas people, you get to have a more sophisticated conversation, which is a real meta level point. But at the end of the day, the capacity of the state to do things is what is either going to unlock, make or break this, is do we as the public sector figure out how to deliver real reliable services to our residents, or do we just see continued degradation? And frankly, in the era of climate change, we only have one option, which is we figure out how to do things again, or we all go into the ocean.
On that somber note,
Wow.
please join me in thanking Gillian and Hunter.
So come work for us. It's a laugh a minute.
Yeah.
Gillian,